Okay. So, what we discuss is the positive scenarios and negative scenarios that we have within the application. Make sure when you are writing test cases, it's better cover all the test scenarios that you can find. You should be able to find, especially a negative, null scenario, empty string, that kind of. There are a lot of use cases that you can find out. Probably I'm not a real good tester in some scenarios. Maybe I can point you guys some references where you can thoroughly learn about testing and testing strategies. But the basics are the same as we are writing test cases. Make sure we run all these test cases within our application. So we cover a lot within the application. Okay. So we have written a unit test to test our logics. Okay, so we introduce these kind of test cases to make sure our logic is not getting some sort of issues while we are working on it. Okay, so next up we'll be working on some sort of component testing. Okay, so the component testing is something similar to a unit test, but in this scenario we'll be testing out our HTML component that we have. So we have the HTML, the game list and everything, and there will be the UI parts and everything. But rather than focusing on our logic, we will be testing out some of the key components within the view itself. So we are not gonna test our logics, but we'll be looking at some of the elements within these UI. You can see there are buttons, there are divs and everything. So we'll be checking out, okay, by introducing a simple sample code, we are not breaking anything in our UI, or we are not breaking anything within our component itself. Okay, so these kind of tests will help us to build a better application in terms of developing while we are introducing new features, and we should not be able to we should be able to add the changes, as well as the existing things should not be breaked as we adding new things. Okay, so you can see the game list component.spec file right around here. It is generated for us. So it's pretty much similar to what we got. Only thing is the only thing that we will be having within this component is that it's gonna have different initiation or different way of handling before each and writing test cases. So remember, we are working in an environment that we have the control over it. Okay, we have the component, and we will be looking at the component in a way that this component is working as expected to our use cases. So if you look at some other test cases which automatically generated for us, you can see the about spec, you will see the same scenario. So we are getting a very simple application initialization. So we have to improvise. So make sure while we are developing the components, we are looking at the test cases as we go along. So we'll be testing the same component that we had, the game list component. So it's going to be a little bit tricky, because we have added some components, added some things, added some features at least within the component itself. You guys can see these things are These things are what we have added. So we have to make sure we are working with these things, and these things are working as expected. All right. So we'll come across several changes, several concepts as along we are writing test cases. So pay a close attention to those things. So the first thing is that we will be needing to instantiate our component. Okay, so the component that we are interested in testing is this game list component. So this so for now on, when I'm referring within this context, the component being the game list component. Okay, so we will be creating something called fixture. Okay, the fixture is like a wrapper around the component. That means we will be not directly interacting with this component. We'll use a fixture. So the fixture is something like a wrapper around it. Using this wrapper, we'll be interacting with this component. So this is a very common architectural pattern or testing pattern that you will see in most of the applications. So we are not directly involving in the component itself. We are we are testing the component as an outsider to that. Okay. So in that, while we are doing that, it makes us easy to interact with these components. The fixture is like a wrapper around this component. So we're going to be using a fixture. So in this scenario, in this application, we will find the component fixture and the test bed which is coming from Angular core testing. So there are more similar concepts in other testing frameworks, in other libraries. You will find these things pretty much similar. So we'll learn once and we can apply those things in other frameworks, other languages as we go along. Okay, so have the basic idea what it is, what we are trying to do, and it's simply just a matter of converting into a framework or testing environment that the application that we are running is using. Okay, so we have the fixture, we have the component, and what we need to do is we need to replicate this game list component. Okay, this is the replication that we need to do. So we need to make sure we are getting an instance of this. We are creating a custom component out of this. So in order to do that, we have something called testbed. Okay, so this helps us to create an instance, a component out of these code definitions. So in simple terms, we say, okay, testbed, configure a testing module, and we'll be using the game list component in order to make the component. So we are saying, okay, we are using the game list component. Make sure we create an instance of it. Okay, so we also make sure we say testbed create components, because this is a module. And since in this Angular version, we are using the module and the component in single term. So we have these standalone components. So that's why we are configuring the module and the component into different levels. But this is important because we are using a standalone component. So you guys do not need to worry about these things. These things are like Angular specific, or we can say that these are like instantiation process. So we'll just simply assume that, okay, by using this syntax, we'll be just simply creating a fixture, and out of that fixture, we will create a component. Okay, so we simply instantiate a component. So we create a fixture, and out of that fixture, we get the component instance, the component that we are interested in. Okay, so we have the fixture as well as the component right out of these things. So the initiation process, initiation of this component and the fixture will be different on each frameworks and platforms. But right now, have an idea, have a practice on the way Angular does it, and you guys will get the hang around it later on. And the next thing is, even though we instantiate these component, the component would not render itself. The component, the HTML component that we are having in here, would not render itself unless we tell it to render itself. Okay, by running this in the browser, of course, when you're interacting with the module, it's going to render out. But in a testing environment, we have the control over when it's going to be rendered out. So using this fixture detect changes method that we are saying, okay, now the initialization part is done. Now the component is created, and make sure the rendering happens as well. That means we detect the changes. That means we say, okay, if there are renders to be happen, if the values are set, now is a good time to render it out. Okay, that's kind of implementation is what we are doing in here, because we have a lot of control over here. Then we should be able to have those things tested out. We'll see how it goes, and we will come across different testing strategies out of this. Okay, so right now we have only one test case. It should create. Of course, that means before anything can happen, the component should not be null, right? The component should create without an issue. So this component should be created once we have done once we have initiated the testing process. Okay, so let's see how we can make the test run as normally. So this should return true. So what we'll do is we will run this test case and check whether yes. So we are creating our component without an issue. So we don't find any errors by initiating the component. But we'll see if we change something, the test case would not pass sometimes, especially in instantiating with third-party dependencies or something like that. So we'll run into those things in a later on. But for now, it seems to be our list component is working, or at least initiating, for now. Okay. So next thing, what we need to do is we need to make sure within this HTML, within this view, we can identify several things. Okay, so several things we can identify. So we can find a button. Okay, yeah. And within the, I think this would be an extra div, so I'll just remove that. You don't want extra divs in your application because it will make things slow, for at least for the browser to render these things out. So we can identify several components in here. Okay, so several components in this scenario is, we can see a button and we can see a div, and within that div we can see an image and we can see some text and everything. So it's not that big deal in terms of application or what we are showing right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna check, whether this button exists within this component. The button should be there. Okay, this div is gonna be there. This class is gonna be there, because for some reason, if somebody comes in and delete this button, or they might have accidentally changed this button to anchor, or they might do some changes. And what will happen is this function on get games function would be something that we can't interact with. The functionality will be completely broken unless this button is gone. Okay, so we have to make sure when we are deploying this application, uh, when you are creating this application and when you are working with this application, we need to make sure this button exists. So um, we have to make sure these things are working, or this button is there, these divs are there. Once we click on the button, at least these things should render out and something like this, even though we can't see it in with browser, but we know if we create this component, this button should be created. And if we click on this button, the list, at least the event should be fired. If we get that kind of things, then we have to move on with the functionalities of this component. So we'll see in action how we can get those things done. So let's go back to our game spec, and I would say it if it should have a button name, button button says, or button with, we can say button with what is the content of that, get games. Okay, there should be a button called get games. It it should show a button with get games. Okay, that is one of our test cases. That is to be correct, because we should have a button called get games. Okay, that is the expected output. So what we'll do is we will go to the test case once again, and we will come with a body for this test case. Okay, and within here we need to get hold of this button. Okay, we to identify the content of this, we need to first get a reference to this button. This button should be within the component itself. How we can get a reference to this button? How do we know? How do we refer this button within our test case? So it's quite simple. So we have the fixture to do that. The fixture is giving us access to those things. So we call fixture, and within this fixture, we can get the component itself, or we can say the native element in the sense it is referring to the component itself. So the whole component, as you can see in here, is referred by this native element section. Okay, within this native element, there are like a lot of other elements, like there can be a button element, div element, ing, h5, and a lot of elements out there. So we need to identify this particular button out of these elements. So there are a lot of HTML elements within this file. Out of those, we need to identify this particular button. So how are we going to do that? So within the native element, you guys can see there is a special keyword. We call this as query selector. Okay, using this query selector, we can say whatever the element that we are interested in. So we are interested in a button. Okay, so simply we are having a reference to the button element. So if we have other identifiable objects like an ID, we can use that. So simply for this reason, I'll be using the query selector as the button. Okay, so let's see this button, const button. I'll have assign it for some for easiness. I'll just say button and I'll try to print it out. Okay, so it should print out the button definition. If I run this test case right now, you guys can see it's representing HTML button definition. Okay, it's having all the things related to a button. So we will see these things in action. Right now, I can say safely, I have the reference to button as I want. No, as I want. So within this button, I should be able to get the text content. Oh, what is the content of this button? So I can simply say text content. Not sure whether this is the exact one for the button, but let's see. Yes, the text content of this button. So whatever the value that we are showing within the button can be accessed by button dot text content. Okay, so whatever the button is, whatever the button can offer can be extracted using this text content. So we can write a test case out of this. Expect button dot text content to be get gains. Okay, so if you guys pay a close attention, the test content for our button is going to be get games, and we are asserting that the button we have found our button, and using that button has a text content, and I am saying, okay, this text content should be able to get gains. So if you pay close attention, the content is the same. If I run it again, and you can say should show a button with get gains is passing around. That means our test case is working. Our test is actually working. So imagine situation where one of your colleagues, one of your users, or one of your peer programmers came to this, and while he was working on, okay, he had to change something in here. There might be a model was changes, but when he saves accidentally, he have type S here. Okay, you guys can see by accidentally he have pressed an S, and he did not notice that. Okay, the content it was changed, and he did not notice, and he was saving that. And when we are trying to go with this to production, this is going to be a bug, right? Because there shouldn't be an extra S in here, so that's going to be a bug. So lucky for us, if we have the test cases written for us, and it's pointing out, okay, we are expecting this, but we have received this. So there is something wrong with your recent changes. Make sure your changes, at least if it is the expected behavior, then we should change the testing scenario in here. If it is not, then we have a chance to go back. Before we are going into this production, we can revert back this and work with this, correct this. Okay, so we have that functionality. So we are saved by a test case rather than we are going to a production environment. So this is one way of interacting with this button, right? We have interacted with this button and that works as expected. So what are the other things that we can do with this? What are the things we should be working, and we should be working, we should have, or we can test these things out. So we can do a few things, like we will be looking at like an event. That means we have this button which we can interact with, right? We can click on this button. And once we have interact with this button, there are certain actions going on. In this scenario, it is calling the get games method. So if we hit this get games method, it is calling this get game list service and get games method, and we will return some games, right? And we that is the expected behavior. We should receive some games. Okay, so we can do a couple of things in here. So we can test out whether this button is clickable. Okay, we can say whether this button is clicked, and once it is clicked, it should call this service and it should return some games. So we are testing two things. The button, whenever the user click on the buttons, the games, the games array that we have defined in here should get populated, whatever the numbers of values that we are having in here. So there are interesting test cases coming on, interesting things that we should do while we are doing that. The first thing is we should interact with this button. We should interact this click event. We should trigger this click event in order to work. And the other thing is we need to make sure it calls this game list service and it is bringing us back the get games method. So if you guys can remember, we have a particular test case written to our game list service specs. So it is testing out all the things related to the game list service. So in this scenario, what will be our action? So we will be having a list of games. We will be injecting the game list service. That means the game list service will be injected in here. And the get games method, it's supposed to return us few games. So if we are writing a test case, the next question is, are we going to write a test case for this method? Are we going to write a test case for this method? Because this method particular actually do some things, but are we going to write a test case for this particular method? The simple answer is we are not going to write test cases for this particular method. Why? We have a separate test case or test suite which is dedicated to this game list service. So whatever we need to test within the game list service is already tested in a separate test case or test suite. So we are not going to test anything from here. Instead of that, what we're going to do, we will use something called mocking. Okay, so mocking is one of the architectural patterns or testing patterns that we use quite oftenly. Rather than initiating the actual method and it is return functions, we will have a dummy one. We will have what we call a fake one to interact with. We'll see how this goes. Right now, remember, since this service or this component has been already tested out in a different section, we are not going to test it out, but we're going to mock it out. Mock it out in the sense we will fake it because we know the functionalities. If it is breaking on the game list service, another test case will fail and it should be corrected. But in this scenario, we know That is not going to be our case. We'll be focusing on the component, the game, this component that we are focusing on. We'll be focusing on this one only. So we should not test other things which is related to this, only component related stuff. So we'll see that in a little bit. Okay. So let's go back to the let's go back to the game list component specs. So we should be able to have this button. So next thing that we're gonna do is it should be able to click on the get games button. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is it should be able to click on the get games button. That means we should be able to perform an action. We should be able to perform an action on this button. So let's see how we can do that. The next thing that we're going to be doing is let me give me a second. Give me a second. Okay. The next thing that we need to do, so this query selector does not know huge amount of things or huge amount of information about the button itself. As you can see, if I hover over the button itself, it says button type of any. That means this, even though we know this is a button, we are not pretty much sure in the code level, this is going to be a button, exactly going to be a button. So in this scenario, TypeScript will save us. So for sure, we know this is going to be a button, right? This is going to be a HTML button. So we can simply cast, or we can have the type within our within our code in here. So we can say HTML button element. So now we are for sure this is not going to be a HTML input or HTML paragraph. There are like a lot of things can be available here, but now for sure we know this is not going to be anything else but HTML button element. Okay, so this gives us a few advantages. So there are certain things the button has. Okay, there are certain things the button has. So in that scenario, what we will get is we will get the upper hand on specifically executing things related to a button. Okay, so we know buttons can be clicked. Okay, buttons can be changed. So we know what are the things available for us, rather than having everything that we're going to be doing within the application. So let's see what is the advantages. If I say button now, and you guys can see especially the click event, right? We can see the click event. That means we can, without an issue, perform a click on the button. Okay, right now, if I remove this code section and remove the type definition, if I say button dot, then since this is an any element, that means it can be anything, any sort of thing. It does not show us what are the types, available typings, what are the performable actions, and that can lead to confusion. So to order to remove that, what we do is we have define the options, and I will perform a click on this. Okay, so I will perform a click on this button. So when I click on this button, what should happen? What should happen is it should call this get on get games method. So what really should happen is a call to this onGetGames method should be initiated. That means we should be receiving a call. We should be receiving a call to this method. So remember what we are trying to test. We are clicking on the button. Once the button is clicked, this method onGetGames, this method should be invoked. That is the test case that we're going to do. Say for some reason we have misspelled it, or we are trying to execute this is in a disabled environment, this kind of thing, then our test case should not fire upon. Okay, so when we are calling this, we should be listening in. Okay, within this component, the get games method should be invoked. It should be invoked. So we're going to be testing out that next. So we need to do few things. So we need to make sure that whenever this button is clicked, the method is invoked. So we need to put a listener, or we need to put someone or some agent to make sure that the method is being called. Okay, we need to make sure the method is being called. So we need to do that. Something we call on we call that thing is spy on. Okay, so we use spy on method to make sure that is working on. Give me a second. Okay. Let's see where we can find this spy on. Okay. So first thing what we need to do is we need to define the spy on method. Okay, and we need to say, which method that we're going to be spying on and where we're going to be spying on. So the method that we're going to spy on is going to be within our component itself. You guys can see that the method is in this component. The component itself is the game list component. As you can see, the game list component is referred in here as the component. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pass the component. So within this component, you will get two things to spy on. Right now, there are two variables, games and get on games. So right now, get on games is the one we are going to be spying on. So we will be spying on this get on games method. Okay. So remember, when the button is clicked, the get on games method should be called. Okay, that is our expectation. And in order to make sure this method is called, in order to make sure this method is executed or method is invoked, we need to make sure somebody is listening in, or somebody is having have a look around okay, this method is being called. Okay. In order to capture those events, in order to listen in, we use something called spy on. Okay. So by using spy on methods, we can say simply, okay, this method is should be invoked. So we will look into this, and we should say okay. So we should say was called. That means um, so we should make sure that this method was invoked. I think it should be invoked. And second. Call you, call fake. Should be was called. Yeah, give me a second. Called. So long. Spy on not defined. There's something wrong. Give me a second. Reference spy on is not defined. Okay, I need to call spy on using jest. Jest dot spy on. Jest dot spy on. Yeah. That's the implementation, not the mock. Give me a second. Just spy on. Oh. Okay, so we need to get the spy on in here. Okay, let's see the spy on first. I think we should be able to get no errors because we haven't mocked and everything. So the next thing that we need to do in the test case, we are gonna be writing something like this. So we are expecting called to be called Let's see, this works. Should fail. Yes. Okay. Let me check. Picture detect changes. But, okay, let me explain. So let me go back. There are a few things that you need to know in this scenario. The first thing is, so we are spying on this component. Okay, we are spying on this component. So I'll just, for simplicity, I will call this called. Or I can say get on games spy on. Okay, so it's makes me easy to remember what I'm trying to do. So first thing first, I am clicking on this button, and next thing I am say, okay, spy on the get spy on this method. Make sure to use jest, since we are using jest as our test provider. We need to make sure use jest spy on method. The default spy on method does not work because there are spy on methods from other frameworks. Since we are using jest, we should say jest spy on and the component that we are trying to listen in, okay, and the method. So this method is solely purpose on now. Whenever the get on method is called, we have a reference for that. Okay, and the next thing that we need to test in here is we expect the on get games spy on to be called. That means we are expecting this method. We have a reference to our spy on method, and it should be called. That means whenever somebody clicked in here, it should be called to this method. So that is our expectation. So the test case right around here is expect this method on get spy on to be called. That is our expectation, right? It should be called. But if you run this, we will we will go into some trouble. This won't get executed. Okay. The first reason is the order matters. Okay. When we are trying to spy on some method, okay, make sure we are spying on that method before we do any actions on that. Okay, that's the main reason behind that, because after when we click on it and just is trying to spy on this component, will take some time, and especially the click event is gone by or far gone. So before we click on the button, make sure the spy on methods are in before the click events, we have declared those things. So it should be number one. Otherwise, when we are clicking on it, if you try to spy on it, the window might be lost. Okay, so make sure we are spying on before we click on it. So let's run it again. And it works. So it should be able to spy on like that. So sometimes it might not work. We are spying on the method, but it when the method is clicked, sometimes it will not work. So in a scenario like that, we have to say fixture detect changes, especially if you are looking into things like detection on HTML. This might be a little bit useful. Okay, but right now what we have done is we have spied on our method, which is get on games, and we click on the button, and we have made sure when we click on this button, this method, the method what we call get on games, is to be called. Okay, it is being called, and we can see even there are some methods to be called times. So how many times it has been called? I can say one time. Since when we click on it, it should be the button is only calling one time to this method. Okay, so I can say one time to be called once, that means only one time. If I say two times, okay, when I click on it, it should call two times. This should fail because only one time that we are calling that. You guys can see expected number is 2 but received number 1. That is fairly accurate because we are calling one time to be called one time. So if you want to be this to be very simple, we can say to be called. Okay, to be called is like to be called with one times. Or even we can spy on few other things. We can expect on get game spy on to be called with. Okay, if we have any parameters, if you want to if you want to make sure there are like parameters put into here, you can put those parameters into test. Okay, called with. In here, I don't think the mouse event can be something we can mock. Okay, so I will not try to mock with the mouse event itself, but you can if the method is something rather than a simple event, you can check whether the parameters that we are passing is called upon. Okay, so it is something that we can test whether these button actions are performing as expected. Okay, that is another use case. Okay, any questions up until this? These two action types, especially the spy on and the events handling that's going to happen. Okay, good. So next thing that we're going to do, there's another test case that we need to write. So by default, you guys can see the if we did not click the button, if we did not click the button, what will happen is only after we click the button we should see 4 games, right? And that is because the games array that we have defined in here is going to get populated. The games array is going to get populated after we click on this button. But for demonstration, but for the testing purposes, okay, we can mock these values. We can have dummy values in here and say it should have this amount of values also, this kind of thing. Okay, so we'll see how we're gonna test those things out. I'll wrap around a div. Now I know why I have put this div around in here, and I will ID it as game list wrap. Okay, so I have a div called game list wrap, and within this game list wrap, it should show 4 divs. Okay, it should if I give 4 games, it should have 4 corresponding childrens. If I have given 2 games, then it should have 4 children, 2 children. If I haven't initiate these games, if for the initial state, under this div element, there shouldn't be any children. Let me show you what I mean in UI perspective, so you guys have a better idea what I'm talking in here. Let me open up a terminal in Excel. Better yet, I will open a terminal outside. We will find. CD next, what is the app itself? Game shop. Game shop. Yes, why not? So let me share a new screen, VS Code, as well as my Google Chrome. Okay. Hope you guys can see Google Chrome as well. So look at the UI right now. Okay. I'm not sure whether the UI is completely visible. That's not going to be an issue. So we are in the games UI right around here. Okay, make it as much as possible. So at the initial state, and if I look at my views around here, in here, I have the game list wrap, and under this div, I won't find any children, right? If I click get games, then I get like 3 elements or 3 children belonging to that div. So this div initially should not have anything, but when I click on the button, it should have 3 elements coming up as I click on it. So let me demonstrate how I can get such a thing. Okay, so first thing that we need to do is we demonstrate that we get the initial one. That means if the button is not clicked, then there shouldn't be any children under this div. Okay, so we will write a test case which make use of that. So I would say just delete this. It should not let me come with a good name. It should have 0 children under the game list. Right. Okay. So we have something called game list wrap. Okay, the game list wrap. I would say something like this. So it should have 0 children under the game list wrap. That is for the initial state. So how are we gonna get that done? So first thing first, we need to find a reference to this. So if I say query select div by the element, then it's going to be a little bit of a problem because we have several divs in this. But for lucky for us, we have defined it with an ID. That means we have a uniquely identifiable selection. So by using this ID itself, we can get a reference to this specific div. Okay, so let's get that done. So fixture native element query selector. When we are using an ID, we can't give something like this. The query selector expecting a div name or something like that. If we are referring to an ID, we can have a pound sign. That means this is indicating we will be taking an element with the ID green list wrap. Okay, so rather than referring it as element type like we did on the button, since we have identification for that, we can specifically name the identification. But in order to indicate this is an ID, like in CSS selectors, we would use the hash pound sign. So this is not going to be HTML button element. We will be HTML div element. This is going to be a div element. So make sure we are saying that. So I will say game game list wrap. Okay, that makes more sense. In here, did I delete something in here? I think I have. That's the test case. Okay, so I have the game list wrap. Then what I can say, expect game list wrap. There is the uh, element. There is a property called children. Okay, children indicates how many childrens are in this game list component itself, and I can say game list wrap children length to be 0. That means whenever the base game list wrap is initiated by default, we should not expect any children to be there. So there shouldn't be any children within there. So let's see whether it works. Let's run it. And it says pass. So that indicates the game list wrap is by initially having no children. So let's assume that we have two children to be represented. We can simulate to have two children. That means these divs will be rendered 2 times. So in order to render 2 times, what we need to do is we need to provide games. Okay, the games should be provided. That means this array should not be empty. It should contain 2 games. Once there are 2 games, it should represent 2 divs in here. That means it should have 2 children in here. So how are we going to do that? Simple as enough. We should first copy this one. It should have 2 children on the game list wrap when 2 games are provided, or when there are there are 2 games. Okay, so we better come with a good name. There should have 2 children when there are 2 games. Okay, we can test that out as well. So the element itself, it is true, but in here now we can say component games. I can say rather than it is going to be an empty one, I would provide an image. It doesn't matter. It should not be like what you call real values. As long as the game array is filled out, it is fine. So I have created 2 game instances in here. Okay, rather than having 1 game, I would have 2 in here. Okay, as long as the component games array, this one, is populated, we should have 2 children, right? So let's do one thing, and we say expect to be 2. That means the component itself have 2 games, and we are taking the HTML wrap, and we are expecting to have 2 children. Let's run it. Should not pass. Okay. The reason is we are expecting to, we have received 0. Okay, but we have instantiate the games, right? We have components, and within that components we have provided 2 games, and when the games are provided, it should show us 2 elements, right? Because it is going to loop through, and once it is looped through, we should be able to see 2. It should show me 2 games, but right now it is saying 0. The problem is, even though we have defined the components and defined the games in here, the rendering did not happen, as I mentioned earlier. In browser, yes, if you change it to 2 games, the browser detects the changes, and okay, now they have 2 games, we need to re-render the UI, and it works as expected. But in the testing scenario, that kind of thing is not notified. Even though we have initiated 2 things, it's not gonna show 2 values, or it's not gonna render those 2 games. So in order to do that, as I mentioned earlier, we can use the fixture detect changes. Detect changes. So by calling out, it says, okay, now the things have been changed. Okay, since the values for the games has changed, it will re-render the UI, and it should expect to have 2 values now. So let me run it again, and it works. So make sure if we are doing such a change in our UI level, and the UI has changed based on the inputs that we have got. If you are changing such a thing, make sure to do the feature detect changes as well. All right, so we have written a few test cases in this scenario, and by using these tactics, we can write a lot of test cases. Okay, it's up to the user how many tests that we should write. What are the calls? Even we can spy on these methods, and there's kind of things we can work on. Even we can simulate uh, even we can simulate things like, say for instance, when you click on it and this service is returning 4 games, and it should show 4 elements. That's kind of things are like really simple. So I leave up to you guys to do such a thing. So if you are trying to come up with something like that, you should rely on things like spy on and the return methods, and mock implementation, mock return values. So these are the things if you want to have some returns values, if you like. That kind of thing is totally doable. So please check those things out. I will give you guys room to think about it. Okay. What are the things that we can take out of these testing patterns, testing scenarios, testing components? So few things, few key features that we see in our software design. So the first thing is by again by changing the by changing the sorry by having different views, controllers, and everything, we can test our application in different states. Okay. So if we did not have the component as small as this, we won't be able to test everything within our application. So basically, our logic can be tested out. Our our UI, our representation of the model can be tested differently, and without looking at the perspective. We don't need to like see these things. We don't need to see the UI itself in a browser without looking at the UI implementation, the framework, CSS, and everything. We can simply verify that our functionality works. Okay. So when we click on it, it should call this method, and if you have 2 games, it should render out 2 games in this list. that kind of verification to help us to write better code and better functionality. So we know for sure, even though we change the CSS, let's say we'll change the image position, or we change the image color, we change the H5 colors and everything and all. So even those kind of changes, or those kind of styles, we can monitor. Or if you like, whether these elements are there, we haven't removed anything, we are not rendering something empty, and we can make sure our code work as expected, even though we do any cosmetic changes. Okay, so that is one other thing that we need to make sure. Our business logic, our component stays, and our view is interacting with this component is something that we can make assure it works. Okay, so there can be more test cases that we can write, especially remember one thing: since we have written test cases for the game list service, do not try to implement game service related tests in here. Okay, simply spy on those things like we did on the spec, and return a mock value. Mock value return will help us to have a dummy value if we call this method. Do not try to call this method in actual lines, so it will break. It will make no sense. So in order to make sure that everything is working as expected, the component itself can be tested. But if you have some services that is related to this, do not try to test those services, mock them. Okay, there is one principle that we follow. There are some situations, but we might need to more we might need to get the actual implementation, but those are like very rare cases. As long as you can mock these values, that is the best approach as what we see. Okay, so we by writing these kind of tests, there is another thing happens involuntarily. That is, we are writing very short amount of code. Okay, the logics behind each and every function that we are trying to test. Let's say the component have some logic to be executed within this context. We are trying to find as much as lowest code available in there to write that function. Why? If you are trying to write a test case, if your use case, if your application is if your application is running so many if cases, so many switch cases, so many branches out of that single method, what will happen is testing will make it more miserable. Okay, testing will not help in this scenario. So you will eventually find that yourself, okay, this, yes, I need to write a test case. That is something that we should do. But when I try to write a test case, the test case is really long. Otherwise, the test case is really complicated. The method is untestable. So in order to avoid that, in order to do that, eventually you will find yourself, okay, writing this kind of methods, writing long methods, a method that containing 100 or 200 lines will make testing miserable. So I need to break it down. I will break down this method. So eventually it will be testable. Okay. And knowingly or unknowingly, we follow principles like solid principle. Okay, so those are like really good principles available out there. So we have the solid principle without uh, without knowingly we are working with that kind of that kind of architectural patterns. So in solid principle, we talk about five principles in that scenario. The first one is single responsibility principle. We will get into solid principle later on, but for now, remember, we knowingly or unknowingly, we will implement single responsive principle within our application. Why? It makes our testing easy, and it makes coding easy, and so on and so forth. We will see how we can implement the principles, design principles like solid, clean, onion in architectural patterns and those things in later on. But for now, remember, we by introducing these kind of tests, writing these kind of tests, writing smaller components help us to achieve that goals. So in order to teach you guys the solid principle, KISS principles, and all those things, we should know what it really matters, where it's really shine. Then we can have those things tested out. Okay, so we looked into testing the component. Okay, any questions up until this testing with the components? I know this is like a really small component, but believe me, even though you grow up to a really huge project, the testing principles that we are trying in here, the architecture pattern, the testing mechanism, it's going to be the same. So don't worry about it. Any questions up until this, the testing with components? Any questions? Raise your hand if you have anything. Any questions? If you have, raise your hand, please. Okay. If you understood the principles behind component testing and unit testing, raise your hand. Okay, I understood the things. Raise your hand if you understood the difference between component and unit testing. Raise your hand if you understood. Nobody get it? Everybody's sleeping. That's the reason. Prabhat, you got the idea of unit testing and component testing? Nirmani? Senarat? You got the idea behind...
Yes, sir, understood. Yes, sir.
Got it. Perfect. The main thing that you guys need to do is practice, okay? I can show you guys thousands way of writing test cases, 1,000 test components. Okay, I can write more than you can imagine, but only way that you guys will understand is only by executing yourself. Okay, try these principles, try out these things, and even though we are in Angular framework and JavaScript, the similar concepts you will find the same concept in Java. Okay, you will find the same concept in C# or .NET. Only the way or the libraries that we are using is going to be different. So for example, we are using Jest in here with JavaScript for mocking and spying on those things. In Java, we have something called Mockito. Okay, rather than using Jest, we will use Mockito. Likewise, we have the same concept. So the mocking, spying, everything is available on Mockito. So you don't, okay, if you need to test this scenario, all you need to do is how to spy on Mockito. Okay, that's it. So this is going to be really simple, really straightforward for you guys. So make sure write a small component. If you do not like Angular or any framework, just try what you are good at. Maybe a backend framework. Even backend frameworks have these component likes testing, at least unit testing. So go for those things and check out those things. Later on, we will see these things in action, like the principles that we are, like the solid principles and everything. We will cover those things in later on. But for now, we'll just apply these things first and regain the consciousness of why we are using this in the first place. Okay, so we have completed 2 types of tests, and the last testing mechanism that we're going to be speaking is going to be something related to most of the time, if you guys are going to be like not software engineers, okay, but QA engineers or you automated testers, that kind of position, if you are trying to apply into. This section would be something that you guys find more interest. Okay, these things will be like what we call, these things will be little bit interesting. So end-to-end test involved, rather than depending on the code itself. Even in end-to-end test cases, you will have to write some sort of codes, but you do not need the knowledge in like the structure of the application, like whether it is an Angular application, whether it's a React application. All you need to know is some basic concepts around the application writing, like what we saw in query selecting, performing action or something like that. That would be enough. You don't need to know the logic behind it. So the logics and the components will be tested out by the programmers. The people who are interested in automating the flows. Okay, so now we worked on the component itself. The component itself works perfectly, but what will happen if the component is put it into action in real life? What should happen if a certain flow is followed? So in order to test that, we use something called end-to-end test. Probably when we are using end-to-end test, we do not have the luxury of doing such things as mocking. Okay, we can't rely on mocking. By writing end-to-end test, we are testing the whole flow. Okay, while we are testing, it's going to test the whole flow. If we have API request going on, it should be a production or a staging environment that we should work with. It's not going to be something mocking that we can work with. So end-to-end test will be testing the real system with real data, and most of the time, the data which is coming can be not be production ones, but at least we are working with the real use cases, real test cases in this scenario. Okay, let's see how we can write end-to-end test, and we will see what sort of things that we should know when we are writing end-to-end test, and what sort of things that we should be aware of. So when we are creating our application, the tools that we have created, the index is giving us a very good kickstart. Yeah, I highly recommend you guys to use some kickstart tools like this, because you can't set up, you can, obviously you can set up everything from scratch, like setting up the end-to-end test, setting up the servers and everything, but why the hassle when we have such tools doing for us? Okay, so the tool NX was able to generate end-to-end test setup for us. It's not generating all the end-to-end test cases for us, at least the setup for us. So you don't have to set up Cypress yourself. In this setup, in this application, I have selected Cypress as my end-to-end test. But there are some other testing libraries that you can use, such as Playwright, which is one of the most gaining popularity these days. Personally, I did not have time to play around with Playwright. I'm coming from a background where I use a few other frameworks, like there was a project called Protector. So Protector was one of the initial end-to-end test frameworks that I used. Then I switched back to Cypress. Maybe in the future, I don't know. I'll be testing out Playwright. Right now, I'm currently using Cypress. It is widely used in most of the frameworks. So the best thing about writing end-to-end tests with Cypress is that it is framework independent. That means either you write a React or React to Angular or whatever the web application in this scenario, it does not matter. As long as you can execute Cypress against your application, then you are fine. Okay. So within the same application, we have the GameShare E2E directory created for us. We only work right now until GameShare directory. So this is like where the end-to-end test cases are going to be running in. So if you look at it, there within the SRC folder, you will find a few things. So we have the E2E directory, and we have the fixture directory, and we have something called support. Okay, so these things we will look what are these things in particular. Probably we'll be working with something like the app.cy as an initiation point. Okay, so let's see how we can run this end-to-end test. Okay, first we need to execute this end-to-end test. So as I mentioned earlier, the end-to-end test that we're going to be running is something similar to a real person engaging with the system. Say, for example, we have the browser, right? We have the browser right here. We can click on the about, we will click on the games, we will click on the login. So these are the interaction done by a physical user, right? So what we will do in the end-to-end test is that we're gonna do the same thing, and we will check whether these things are populating. So if I say get games, these values are gonna popping up. If I say about, okay, this text is showing up. If we click on login, it is gonna show these things up. So we're gonna be doing all this by if a human person would do, you have to click on these things, click on here, click on there, and it should show up, right? It's the mechanism behind that. But if a computer does that, it's going to be something a little bit different. But the idea behind that, these things will be automatically clicked for us, and it will be visually shown to us if you like. So let's see how we can get started on that. So first thing first, I need to find the execution command to run this end-to-end test. So if you go to NX JSON file that we generated, most of the time it sorry. Is it the NX or the project? Give me a second. Default. Okay, sorry. In here, within the GameShare end-to-end file, you will find this project JSON, and so you can run simply end-to-end -end, test cases by executing this command. So if I say get games, this is going to show up. If I say about, okay, this text is showing up. If I say about, it is going to show these things up. So we're going to be doing all this by So I'm gonna run the same exact command and I'll show you what is happening. To show this, I might probably want to share my whole screen. Let me get it back. Okay, first thing first, I'll run that command and I will show you the next step. First, I will take a terminal and I will write nx run in dash share dash E2E E2E colon E2. First, I will show you guys the terminal and I'll show you guys some interesting stuff happening going on. Terminal. Okay, hope you guys can see my terminal. So first thing first, that the command that we need to execute is nx run the project that we are interested in running. In our scenario, I'll be running gain share E2E, that is the project name. And the execution is E2E. That means I'm going to execute E2E, E2E, E2E test. Okay, so I'm currently using my port 200. Sorry, 4200. So I'll be using something like 4209. So that means I'm going to open my end-to-end test in different port. Okay, so I am starting to run, but immediately I failed my test. Okay, so this one, that the testing mechanism that I have run, it's failing because if I see the test cases has been changed. What we see in the test cases is changed. But there is another way that we can visualize these changes. Okay, so rather than running all these test cases in a terminal, of course, running these kind of tests in a terminal would make sense when we are running these things in a CI/CD pipeline. Okay, if you want to use a CI/CD pipeline, then probably this would make more sense to run by using this particular command. But say, for example, I want to see these things in action via a web browser or something like that. I can completely do that. So I use an extra argument in here called watch. Okay. So rather than running in background, it will show me a UI that I can work with. So let me start sharing what I see in the screen right now. Share my screen. I'll share the terminal as well as the Cypress. So I get to see the Cypress what's new in area. I suppose you guys can see it as well. And it's going to show me the what's new and those kind of things. I'm going to just continue. And when I pass the watch options, it is asking what is the execution environment. So if you are trying to automate these things, where are you going to run these things? So rather than using Electron, I would probably go with something like Chrome. Okay, that's something easier. So the automated test will be running against a Chrome browser rather than running on an Electron application. So I would choose Chrome and I'll say start end-to-end testing. Probably you guys don't see it again. Let me share the newly created window. So I'll start a new share. I don't think I need terminal anymore. I would share the Google Chrome automated environment, which is, where is it? This one. So this is what you will see when you're coming into the application. So we have specs and we have runners, debugs, and settings. So we'll probably focusing on specs. So we have currently we have open our src E2E and app.cy.ts. So this is like the initial test cases that the application is trying to run. So I will run this and see what's happening in here. So I will click on it. You guys can see the page is loading in here and the test case is failing. So the test case currently what we have is not correct. So what happened is it is saying a fail. You guys can see the app support even says, okay, whatever you are trying to reach, it is no longer working. That is fine because we have changed the application. So in order to make sure that we are updating the use cases, we will update our test cases and try to get these things around. Okay, the first thing is let's see the test cases that we have currently. Visual Studio Code as well as. Okay. So in our end-to-end test case, so we have the E2E app.cy, and you guys will see is something similar to what we have seen in Jest. Okay, we have the test suite, and we have the lifecycle methods, and we have some test cases that is running. So the first thing that you guys will see the describe method, and before each, that means what should happen before each. And the first thing it should say sy visit root. Okay, that means before each and every request, we are going back to the root of the application, root of the URL. Okay, if we compare this if I compare this to the application test components, it is something similar. We are resetting each and every time, so we are not depending on anything when we are executing our test. So in here, it should display a welcome message. This is no longer valid. Okay, so I will just have this in comment. Okay, and we should say let's look at let's look at this application right now. If we come to the home page, what we should see is we should see about and login and games. That is like what we are expecting in here. Okay, that is what we can see in here. So we should write a test case on that. Okay, so we will say it should display about link. That is what one of the use cases. So how we gonna do that? So the first thing is first we need to visit that page. Of course, that is right, and we need to get a reference to this about anchor element. Okay, that is the next thing. So by simply looking at the component, looking at the page, we should bear in mind the test cases that we are going to writing in here is someone who is outside of the development, who's going to be a QA engineer or someone who is doing a black box test. Okay, so we can't say that the interaction level of this person or this user will be a little bit different. They might see these element in a different way. Okay, so they can see they can say find a link with the text about. Okay, and we then they can say click on that or something like that. So we need to make sure to get a hold of this without looking at the code, or sometimes even with the sometimes without especially without looking the code. But there might be some use cases. If they are an ID, yes, we can prefer that ID and we can get a reference to this. If not, we are left behind with element itself and all the other things. So we will take a we will get a reference to this about link. So in order to get a use of those kind of things, we use something called project objects or PO files, rather than finding all those about links and all the elements in different test cases. We create a project object which hold all the reference to these elements, so we can reuse them. So there is this get greeting one, which use CY get parameters. If you guys can remember, it is something similar to the um, uh, component testing that we have done. We have that get method. So in order to get greetings, we use the CY get and H1. So this is no longer a valid use case. So I'll comment it out. I'll say export const about. Since I'm working on a get a reference to about, I will say const about link. Okay, that makes more sense. Have a good name. So in order to get that, I will use cypress dot get. Okay, and we need to find a selector. Okay, so you can say we have different selectors that we can use. So it's gonna be an anchor, right? It's gonna be an anchor, and the so that is like the basic of it, but it does not reflect the things or the uniqueness for the about link, right? Because the about has there are three anchors in that page. Okay, there can be probably more: about, home, and game list. So simply saying getting the anchor would not be sufficient, because that would lead more that would refer to more elements in this scenario. So we should find it with more attributes or more things that we can find within this application, within this element. So we can have more of the fine tunes or fine tune version and all those things. So we will get few things, few other ways. Like we have find. Okay, now I'll just stick to get. I'll get an A, and the we can say contains. Okay, and we can say about. So that we have narrowed it down, we need to get an anchor which contains above, so that we can say about link. Okay, we can refer that as about link. So in here we can simply import that. I can say about link, and I can verify that this one is existing. So I can say expect about link the use case is contain give me a second. About link. About link. Did I return? Yes. Okay, we'll just go in here. Expect about link to be expect okay, this one should be contains, then I should return jQuery anchor element. EY. Give me a second. Link should the type difference is not working. Here it says should. Check. About link. Okay, I forgot the um, it's a function, so I forgot that. Sorry about that. Okay, so we should say about link should be should exist actually. So what we are saying in here is that we are using the project object and we are trying to get an anchor which contains an about. Okay, and in the test case we should say the about link, the element that we are trying to find should exist. That means the about link should be there. So if we go here and you guys can see should display about link. Okay, that is correct. Let's try to do another one, and we will take the same thing and we should say login. Okay, we will say this one is about, sorry, login link. Okay, and we should also say login link should be exist. So we are running another one, and you guys can see in Cypress in here, we can see there's things are again, it's executing. So if I refresh this page, you can see run all these tests. These tests are really fast, so it is executing everything in one single shot. And the next thing that we can do, of course, we should have a game reference to game. So there is one called games. We should be able to define a game link, games link, and it should say games. So we are getting an element which contains games. So we can easily identify that. Same scenario, games links should exist. That means all of our three elements are in existence. So that's a good thing that we know. Okay, these elements are existing. Okay, next thing is that we can do is we can click on one of these pages and we can see the content should have something like this. So we can have a test which is written out of that. So the next thing that I did was I click on the about and I should be able to get this text. Actually, let me go to the source code itself and change the content. It's an H1. This is about page. Okay, so grammatically correct. And we can write another test case in here. It should display what is the text that we are expecting. When we click on it, I'm going to be let's write a dummy. It should display and H1. Okay, I'll just say H1, then I will be specific around it. So in order to show when click on about. So when what I need to do is I need to click on the about page and it should show me an H1 containing some details. So we should write a test case. First thing first, we need to get the about link. Okay. And what I need to do is perform an action on it. Okay. I should click on it. Okay. What I'll do is I will go to I will have the reference to the about link and I will click on it. Once I click on it, I can say cy.get and I should get and I will refer this as H1. Okay. Or I can just simply say H1 should contain, I will just write a false case, false one, and I will go back to my test case in here. And you guys can see it is executing this command, and when I click, this one is failing. Expect to H1 containing false, but timely error I could not find. So I will write the expected one. This is the about page. So I will say it should show display, and when it should contain, this is about page. So right now, if I refresh, you guys can see it is executing really fast. I'm not sure whether you are grasping that. And it is executing all these commands, and it is working as expected. Now I will go to the login page, and it should say login works. So I will write another test case. It should click, it should display error on when we click on login. Okay, so if I click on login, we should be able to see a error. So rather than click on the about one, I'll click on the login, and we should have a test case something like this. We should be able to get a P. It should contain login works, something like this. You guys can see that it is executing the test really fast. Okay, really fast. It's executing all these things, and it is going again with that. So I will go to the games one as well, and I will execute this get games, and it should have these three things. So that is going to be my last test case. Let's see it in action. So I'm writing some test cases. It should display button when we click on games. Okay, so rather than click on the game links, about links, I will click on the game links, and I should get a button which contain get games. Okay, let me have that on myself. As you guys can see, there are like few test cases running on it, and I should get a button get games that is also passing. And now I should be able to click on it, and we should get some other things as well. So I will just click on it, and you guys can see it's automatically doing that as on me. So if I refresh again, all the test cases are running, and it is hitting on the get games, and that is also working. And once I click on the games, and I should be able to see three in this scenario, I should be able to see three elements. So I can write a test case on that as well. So I can say cy dot get. I know for sure there will be a div. Okay, and rather than a div, if I look the application closely, I should be I can like inspect this element, right? And I can check whether the divs that I am interested in is here. So I can see the div with the ID of game list wrap. Okay. So purely without looking at the code, by looking at the inspect element, I can get the ID of the wrapper. Okay. I can say get something like this, and I can say should have children, I think. I should get this children Children, I think I can say length. I will say x. I can say length. Length. Okay. You can say expect length to be equal 3, I think. Yeah. Um, expected 0 to equal 3. I think this case is wrong for some reason, and my test cases are getting slow. I'm not sure why. Probably the internet is, yeah. So what I can do is I should be able to get at least this one. Children. Okay. So let me go back once again with the last test case that we have executed. So you guys can see, I'm not sure, zoom in a little bit. So you guys can see what are the execution happens in the application or in this test suite. Before each, I will visit this. You guys can see, you can click on it and visit that exact moment, the exact action. And you guys can see get A containing games. You guys can see these things are highlighting in here. And what is the action that we perform? Clicked, and we click on the button. Then we clicked on the URL. When click on the button, and we expected to click on that time as well. So you guys can see in here, and it should get game list web. That is also correct. So we can see that these steps, step by step, what we are doing is in here, and those are being executed using Cypress. So it is showing us these executions are happening like we do a normal user would do. The test case that I'm trying to write, I'm not sure I'm getting the right vibe out of it. Children, it should be expect children length. I'm sure this why is not. Yeah, probably the mechanism that I'm trying is should be wrong. That might be the case, but we'll get more things done later on. So right now, what we can do is we can execute these things in this order, and we get the values as we expected. Okay, give me a minute, please. All right, sorry about that. So we wrote the end-to-end test that a normal human would interact, how a normal person would interact with the system, and what are the things they will expect, and This is like very simple form of writing an end-to-end test. Okay. Now if I write one single test, it should like go for the whole web application, and it's gonna execute everything. So a normal human would not do the same thing again and again, and probably sometimes we will forget to check everything everywhere. But writing an end-to-end test case like this would probably help us to get all the test cases running in, especially when we are dealing with the CI/CD pipeline, and we want to make sure the flows haven't been not broken, so we can completely go with this. So this does not, in this demonstration, we are just simply clicking and executing some stuff and see whether it is popping up and see whether the elements are there. Okay, so rather than test, we can obviously do some testing with the component level as well. For example, the about login and game links existence, we can check those things in component level as well. If you are doing those things in component level, there is no need to write end-to-end tests for that kind of situation. Okay, so we can ignore that. If you are writing on end-to-end component test, we don't need to write that. But one thing that we need to remember, where to run what. Okay, so end-to-end test, which kind of things that we need to test, and component test or integration test, and the next thing is a unit test. So where to run, where to write these kind of tests, and what is the what are the use cases of each of these tests. So that is something very important that we need to remember. Okay, so I think probably you guys have heard the term test pyramid. Okay, so if you do not know, just have a look around this test pyramid. Okay, a simple form would be something like this. It shows the amount of code or the amount of tests that we need to write, as well as I think this one speaks for our use case. So the amount of test case that we need to write and proportion of it. So in the test pyramid, on the top, we will see end-to-end test. Okay, in the middle you will see integration or component test, or at the bottom you will see unit test. Okay, so by looking at this, is the there are two things we need to make sure. The triangle, the pyramid itself, gives us the amount of test cases there should be within the project. So if you are writing end-to-end tests, so it's going to be a little portion of our entire test suites. Integration test is in the middle ground, and unit test is covering a lot of area. So in proportion, like a normal project would say 60 to 70%, or maybe depending on the project, normally roughly 60 to 70%, it should consist of unit test. And integration test, depending on where, it's going to be like 20%. And end-to-end test, it's going to be like 10% of all your test cases. So we can see that the number of test cases that we are running, end-to-end test should be a less portion. Integration is like middle portion. Probably half of your test cases that you are writing is going to be unit test. There's a reason for it. The reason is being, you guys can see running end-to-end tests is not easy. Okay, so it is like emulating the whole web environment, and it is taking little bit time to execute. You guys can see it's loading the page. You have to wait until the page load, and you have to check the elements are there. End-to-end tests are comparatively to integration and unit tests. Those are slow. Okay, since it is slow, the amount of time that it takes to execute those test cases is going to be a little bit higher. So if you have a huge project, the huge project will contain if it is containing a lot of end-to-end test, it will take a longer time to get everything executed and get everything running. So in order to reduce the overhead, reduce the number of execution that's going to happen, the time that it's spending on testing. So we will write 10 to 15% of end-to-end tests. Okay, and comparatively, integration tests are faster than the what we call in the test pyramid, but not fast as a unit test. Okay, so we can write integration test, which are much more faster, but they are testing on certain components and everything. But compared to unit test, integration tests are pretty much slow. So the portion of integrating, having integration test to a project is around, as I mentioned, it's going to be a 20 to 30%. It depends on the project. We can't exactly say, but have a rough idea on the ratio. And unit test, as much as as much as you can have unit test. So as a developer or as a QA engineer, always try to focus or always try to get the implementation or the implementation tested out in unit test first. If you can go with a unit test, and if you can get the testing and you can get the testing out of unit test, then you are good. If the unit test fails, sometimes the unit testing is not gonna work, then go for an integration test. Okay, sometimes there are flaws, sometimes there are like things you can't test around a single globe, then only and only that go for an end-to-end test. Okay, so make sure the ratio, the execution speed, and the flow of the direction where we should get the pyramid testing within our project. If you do not, if you find yourself, okay, end-to-end test is pretty much easy to run, that pretty much easy to execute, that is not always the use case. Try to go with unit test integration. If not, go to end-to-end test. All right, so have that execution flow within your mind, so you guys get to know what's the execution amount of test, execution speed, and everything in a project testing. Okay, so we've written a couple of test cases. We written end-to-end test, in component test, and unit test. So make sure to apply this concept within your next project, and apply the testing pyramid in real action. And you guys see you guys saw it for yourself. The execution speed is different, and the amount of time that it takes to write is different, as well as the exposure of the system is different on person to person. So make sure where you fit in. If you are a QA developer, probably you would need to go something like end-to-end test. If you are if you are a normal, if you are a developer, probably go ahead with unit test and component test or integration test as it requires. Okay, so keep in mind, testing is not optional. Testing is something that you should follow in any project. If you are avoiding test cases, if you are trying to if you are trying not to write tests for your code, then probably you will be having troubles in the end. Okay, when you are growing the project, sometimes when people are collaborating, probably you will be in trouble. So make sure testing is not an optional. Make testing first priority for your application. Okay. All right. Any questions up until this sections, guys? Anything about the testing and testing pyramids and everything? Okay. No, if you have anything, just let me know. Let me stop recording and stop sharing. Okay.